Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Did you ever run your fingers across a glossy Goosebumps cover, trying to decide which monster would haunt your dreams that week? Do you remember that oddly exciting fear right before bed when you cracked open a new Goosebumps book and felt like something might just crawl out from under your bed? Can you still smell the mix of book ink and cafeteria pizza in the air of our elementary school fare? If these memories stirred something in you, you're in the right place. Stay with me until the end of tonight's story, because I'll take you back to that exact moment, that perfect blend of fear and excitement when we believed monsters lived. In ventriloquist dummies and haunted masks, and somehow, that was exactly what made bedtime fun. By the end of this story, you'll remember what it felt like to be a kid again, staring at those covers, convinced they were staring back at you. Doubt it. Always started in the cafeteria. Not with lunch trays or noisy announcements, but with folding tables draped in bright plastic tablecloths. On those days, the room smelled less like chicken nuggets and more like fresh paper and dreams. The Scholastic Book Fair had arrived. My school used to hang a big, bold banner at the entrance. Reading is magic, and for a few days, it really did feel that way. Rows of wire racks spun lazily as kids circled like hungry bees. But I wasn't after just any book. No, I was hunting for a GOOSEBUMPS dot. Do you remember the way the covers seemed to glow under the cafeteria lights? They were always at eye level, strategically placed to catch a fourth grader's attention. The bright, almost neon colors, the embossed lettering, and the monsters. Oh, the monsters. Melting faces, evil puppets, skeletons in Hawaiian shirts. It was impossible not to stare. I remember one particular morning, walking past the stacks of Babysitter's Club and Captain Underpants, ignoring the eraser displays and posters of dolphins, leaping over rainbows. I had one mission: find the scariest Goosebumps cover of them all. Back then, they were more than just books. They were keys to another world. Each one had a different flavor of fear, and I craved the creepiest one I could find. I'd lift each book slowly, like it might bite. I'd trace the covers with my fingertips. Yes, I used to do that. Did you too? As if touching the bumps of the embossed title made the story feel more real. That year, it was Night of the Living. Dummy 2 that stopped me in my tracks. Slappy's face looked freshly polished, but his smile was cracked, not quite right. His green eyes weren't just printed ink. They followed you. I swear they did. I held the book up closer, tilting it in the light, and the shadows seemed to dance around his grin. Did you ever argue with yourself over which one to get? My hands were full, say, cheese and die. The Haunted Mask, One Day at Horrorland, but there was only money for one. My mom had handed me $5 that morning with a whispered warning. Only one book, okay? And maybe one pencil if you really need it. But I didn't need a pencil. I needed fear. Slappy won that day. Of course he did. I still remember handing the book to the volunteer mom at the cash table. She wore big, clunky glasses and had a stack of Lisa Frank stickers beside her elbow. When she saw my choice, she raised one eyebrow and asked, "You sure about this one?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, but somehow feeling like I had just accepted a dare. Carrying that Goosebumps book through the halls felt like holding a cursed object. I swear it was heavier than the others, like it knew something. I didn't even wait to get home. I read the first page sitting on the steps outside the gym, the warm vinyl of my puffy jacket crackling every time I shifted. That afternoon, after homework, after dinner, after brushing my teeth, I climbed under the covers with my book like a soldier preparing for battle. My little reading light clipped to the headboard cast long, spooky shadows on my Space Jam comforter. Outside, the street lamp glowed soft orange through my curtains. And inside, Slappy waited. Have you ever read something that made you look over your shoulder, just in case? That night, I did. Every creak of the floor, every hum from the old box fan in the hallway felt like it was part of the story. And wasn't that the magic of it? Those books didn't just tell stories. They followed you, Dot. By the time my mom peeked in to say goodnight, I had dog-eared the page where Slappy first speaks on his own. Her voice broke the spell, but only just. She kissed my forehead and whispered, "Sweet dreams," not knowing I had chosen the exact opposite. That was the best part of Goosebumps, wasn't it? They let you feel brave without ever leaving your bed. You could stare down ghouls and cursed mummies with nothing but a flashlight and a blanket fort. You could close the book if it got too scary, but you never really did you? Looking back, I realize I didn't just read those books. I lived them. I breathed in their fear like bedtime air. And every year, when the book fair came back around, I felt that same delicious chill. I'd search for the creepiest new cover, hoping it would find me before I found it. Dot, did the covers really call out to us? Or were we just ready to listen? I think it was both. We were kids in the 90s, raised on Are You Afraid of the Dark and Purple? Ketchup. We wanted something weird, something thrilling. Goosebumps gave us that one shiny cover at a time, Dot, so the next time you see one of those books at a yard sale, maybe on a dusty wire rack near some old VHS tapes, pick it up, look closely at the cover, let the nostalgia wash over you. You might not be a kid anymore, but that strange little thrill, that whisper of spooky wonder, it's still in there, Dot. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, just know that you're not alone. Somewhere out there, Slappy's still smiling. And he remembers you. There was a rule on the school bus. No loud talking, no standing, no snacks, and definitely no reading while the vehicle was in motion. Or at least, that was my mom's rule. You'll get carsick, she'd warned a dozen times before. But how could I possibly wait? As soon as I stepped onto the bus, with Slappy's grinning face still burning through the glossy cover in my hands, I knew I wasn't going to follow that rule. The afternoon sun was pouring golden light across the brown vinyl seats, and everything smelled like winter jackets and bubble gum. I slid into my usual spot, second row from the back, next to the window where I could tilt just enough to keep the book open without anyone else seeing it too clearly. This one was for me. Dot, do you remember how it felt to start reading a book you had been dying to get your hands on? Like holding your breath and diving deep into water. That moment when the real world went quiet and the words lifted off the page like whispers meant only for you. I hadn't even gotten to the second chapter before the hum of the engine faded. Behind the sound of the story, behind the voice I was imagining for Slappy in my mind, it wasn't deep or monstrous. It was cheerful, too cheerful, and that made it worse. The other kids around me were laughing, tossing their hats, some trading gushers or stickers, others leaning over seats to whisper about who said what to who during recess. But I was far, far away. I was in a dusty attic, with two sisters arguing over a dummy they'd found in a chest. The words seemed to glow under the dim light slipping through the narrow school bus windows. Every page turned was a door creaking open dot. Do you know that feeling when you're reading? Something scary, and you have to pause just for a second to look around? Not because you're scared of the book, but because it's making the world around you too quiet. That happened around page 32. A shadow from the trees outside flickered through the bus window and brushed across my arm. I didn't scream, but I froze, just for a second. Then I laughed quietly to myself and turned the page. I was hooked. Back then, the bus ride felt like it lasted forever. But that day, it passed too quickly. I wanted more. I remember looking up only when I heard the brakes squeal at my stop, and for a split second, I was annoyed. I had just gotten to the part where the dummy really moved, and the sister swore she saw his eyes blink. I shoved the book into my backpack and raced off the bus. Not even noticing the pile of leaves I nearly tripped over on the sidewalk. Home wasn't far. I lived in a 2-story house with white siding and a crooked mailbox that leaned a little. To the left, my dog Baxter was already barking from the backyard. I waved at him but didn't go to the fence. Not today. I needed my room. I needed silence. I needed the next chapter. Inside, the house smelled like detergent and something baking probably. My mom's cinnamon rolls. Usually, I'd run straight to the kitchen, but not this time. I bolted up the stairs, skipping the third step because it always creaked. My room was waiting. My little safe haven with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a tiny boombox on, the dresser, and a pile of Goosebumps books stacked like sacred stones on the knitstand. I tossed my backpack onto the floor and flopped onto the bed, not even bothering to take my shoes off. The book was already back in my hands. The sunlight was softer now, fading into that perfect late afternoon orange, the kind that makes everything feel warmer, even in winter. I pulled the blanket over my legs, turned on the reading lamp beside me, and picked up exactly where I left off. Why did those stories pull us in so fast? What was it about Goosebumps that made us forget everything else? I think it was because they never wasted time. Right from the first page, you knew something was off. You didn't need to wait for chapter 10 to feel uneasy. R.L. Stine had a way of making ordinary things, the attic, the neighbor's house, a dusty puppet feel like traps waiting to snap shut. And maybe, just maybe, we liked being scared a little. But only a little. Just enough to keep the heart beating faster as we flipped each page. Just enough to make bedtime an adventure. My mom knocked on the door a few minutes later, her voice muffled through the wood. Snacks ready if you want it. I called. Back that I'd come down soon, but we both knew what that meant. I wasn't going anywhere. Not until I found out what Slappy was going to do next. Each paragraph seemed to blur with the next. The suspense building, the tension stretching like a rubber band about to snap. And I wasn't just reading. I was inside the house with those characters. I could smell the old wooden floorboards, hear the creaks on the stairs, feel the strange chill that seemed to follow that dummy around. Back then, the best part of reading a Goosebumps book wasn't just the scare. It was the feeling that you knew what was coming, but you still wanted to see it. You had to see it. And even if the twist was something you half expected, the way it was told made it feel brand new. I must have read 60 more pages before the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows on my carpet. That's when I finally paused, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to make the story last. If I finished the book that night, it would be over, and part of the magic of a Goosebumps book was dragging it out, letting the story echo in your head just a bit longer. I tucked the book gently under my pillow, Slappy's smirk peeking just above the edge, like he knew he'd be waiting for me when the lights went out. And strangely, I liked that. The idea that something creepy could hide under your pillow, and it was okay. Because in the 90s, our monsters came with page numbers, and that made them easier to face Dot. So yes, I flipped through those pages on the bus ride home, breaking my mom's rule, barely noticing the world outside the window. And no, I didn't regret it. That day, and many days like it, were little adventures tucked between the covers of a paperback book. It was impossible to wait until I got to my room. The stories were too strong, the pull too deep, the thrill too sweet. And that, I think, was the true magic of those moments. Not just the fear or the stories themselves, but the way they couldn't wait to be read. The way they made everything else stop, even the school bus. I always told myself I would stop reading before it got too late, that I'd close the book at a reasonable hour, brush my teeth, turn out the lights, and get some sleep like any normal fourth grader. But of course, I never did. Not when a Goosebumps book was waiting under my pillow. Especially not that one Dot. My parents had no idea I'd been reading all evening. When they checked in after dinner, I had my desk lamp off and my backpack zipped shut, as if I hadn't even touched the book since. Getting home, I answered all their questions about homework and chores with a convincing yeah, I did it already, which was only half a lie. Math could wait. Slappy couldn't. Dot, do you remember how the world changed after bedtime? How your bedroom, so familiar during the day, took on a different personality once the lights went out? I used to think my dresser grew taller in the dark, that my jackets hanging on the wall turned into hunched shadows with crooked arms. I'd stare at those shapes for minutes at a time, trying to convince myself they were just clothes, just furniture. But that night, I wasn't just imagining things. I was inviting them in. I waited until everything was quiet. My parents were downstairs, watching something on TV, probably a sitcom with a laugh track and low volume. My younger brother had already fallen asleep in the next room. The hallway light was off, and the soft hum of our ancient refrigerator was the only sound in the house. I slid my hand under the pillow, feeling the smooth cover of the book before pulling it out. Then came the flashlight, a small one, barely brighter than a nightlight, with a flickering bulb that made everything feel more haunted. I had hidden it weeks earlier inside a shoebox under my bed, just for nights like this. When I clicked it on and tucked it under the blanket with me, the light felt warm and secret, like a glowing ember. I wasn't supposed to have Dot. Do you remember? The sound of a turning page when you're the only one awake? It's not loud, but it feels loud. Like you're doing something you shouldn't. That thrill of breaking the rules in the quietest, gentlest way possible. Under the blanket, it was just me, my flashlight, and Slappy. He was already causing chaos in the story. Pulling pranks, no. One believed were real. And each time he moved or smiled or spoke, I could feel my heart beat a little faster. I knew he was just a puppet. I knew the pages were just ink and paper. But it didn't matter. The room around me started to shift. My stuffed animals on the shelf suddenly looked like they were watching me. The closet door cracked just a couple inches, seemed to breathe. Even the ceiling creaked differently, like the house itself was listening. Every time I moved my arm, the flashlight beam would bend across the blanket in weird shapes, making shadows dance on the pages. Dot, Did you ever feel like your blanket was your only protection? That thin barrier between you and whatever might be. Lurking just outside? I did. And yet, I refused to come out from under it. Because despite the fear, despite the heavy silence of the room, and the way each chapter ended on a cliffhanger, I wanted to keep going. There was a part where one of the characters finds Slappy in a chair, head tilted, arms limp, mouth just slightly open. They swear they didn't leave him like that. And for a split second, I thought I heard something in my room too. A rustle, a creak. I froze, holding my breath. The flashlight dimmed slightly, and I gave it a tap. Just a loose battery. Probably. I peeked out from under the covers for a second, eyes scanning the room. The stars on my ceiling barely glowed. Anymore, one of the posters on the wall was curling at the corners, casting a low shadow that reached toward my bed. I ducked back under Dot. It wasn't real. I knew it wasn't real, but the fear was, and somehow that made it better. Why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we seek out fear, even when it makes us tremble? I think it's because when we're scared, we feel alive. And reading under the covers, with only a flashlight and your imagination, makes the world smaller, more focused. It's just you and the story. Nothing else matters. Not time, not sleep, not even the creaking noises coming from the hallway. I kept reading. Eventually, I lost track of time. My eyes began to sting from the tiny, blinking beam of the flashlight. I shifted onto my side, adjusting the book to keep the pages flat, my fingers slightly numb from holding still too long. And still, I couldn't stop. Slappy had gone missing in the story. The characters thought someone had moved him, but no one would admit to it. Doors were opening on their own. Notes were being left with twisted handwriting. And then, the line that made me stop breathing altogether, he was watching me. I could feel it. I didn't move. My heart was thumping in my ears. I glanced at my closet again, which now looked much darker. The air felt colder too. But still, I turned the page. Eventually, I heard footsteps downstairs. My dad heading to the kitchen for a drink. I knew what came next. In exactly 3 minutes, he'd come up to check on us before bed. I'd have to shut the flashlight, stash the book, and pretend to be asleep. I didn't want to. Not yet. Just one more page. But rules are rules. I flipped ahead quickly, skimming just enough to make peace with where I was stopping. Then I clicked the flashlight off, tucked the book under my pillow again, and slid deeper into the covers. The room was pitch black now. No more beam of safety. No more soft glow to keep the monsters away. And still, I smiled, because I wasn't scared. Not really. I was just alive, awake, thrilled, full of that wild energy only a Goosebumps book could give a kid in the 90s. And maybe, just maybe, I hoped the shadows in my room would move. That something strange would happen. That a little bit of the story might leak. Into the real world, I drifted off like that. Heart still racing, images swirling in my head. Slappy's face frozen in his grin. The attic door creaking open. The flickering light. The voice that said, "You and I are going to have so much fun." And just before sleep pulled me under, I reached for the book one more time, just to make sure it was still there. Thought it was. The next morning felt a little heavier, and not because of lack of sleep. I had woken up with the book still under my pillow, the flashlight beside me like a companion who had kept watch all night. My mind was still swirling with the final images I'd read before falling asleep. I couldn't shake them, and honestly, I didn't want to dot at school, while everyone else was talking about the latest playground rumors or what snacks they had traded at lunch. I was still stuck inside the pages. That's the thing about R.L. Stein stories. They didn't end when you closed the book. They clung to you. They whispered to your thoughts long after you turned the last page. Have you ever felt that? That eerie aftertaste of a twist you didn't see coming? I remember one ending in particular that left me staring at the ceiling for almost an hour. The story had followed a pretty ordinary boy, much like me, who discovers his family is acting strange. The suspense built slowly, little signs that something was off. His mom cooking meals she never cooked before. His dad locking the garage every night. The dog barking at nothing. Then, in the final paragraph, literally the last 3 lines, it turns out the boy was the one who wasn't human. He was part of some experiment, and his family had been assigned to monitor him. I just sat there, book on my chest, trying to breathe normally again. Why did those endings hit so hard? Was it because we never saw them coming? Or maybe because they played fair the whole way through, laying down clues that only made sense when it was too late? R.L. Stine had this way of taking something simple and turning it on its head, right? When you thought you were safe, you'd read an entire book thinking the haunted mask was cursed, only to learn the real curse was inside the person wearing it. You'd follow a plot about kids being chased by monsters, only to find out they were the monsters all along. It made you second-guess everything. Your toys, your friends, even your own reflection. After school, I rushed home like usual. I barely said hello to my mom, who always greeted me with a snack and a warm smile. I snatched a cookie from the plate she'd set out, mumbled something about homework, and bolted to my room. I had to finish the last few chapters of Night of the Living Dummy, too, the one I'd been reading under the covers the night before. I climbed into bed early, which fooled my parents into thinking I was being responsible. Reading before bed again? My dad asked with a wink. I nodded, not mentioning that bedtime for me was more of a suggestion when a Goosebumps book was involved. That night, I devoured the ending in one breath. Slappy's reign of terror had reached its peak, and just when you thought the characters had finally outsmarted him, he turned it around with a single line. Just one sentence that made your skin crawl. I won't spoil it here, but if you remember, you know the feeling. That cold rush behind your ears, the way your spine straightens, how you glance over your shoulder, even though you know no one's there. Then the most twisted part? It wasn't just that Slappy was evil. It was that he was smart. He knew what scared you. Sometimes the twist was subtle. A missing object that had been in plain sight the whole time. A friendly character suddenly saying something that didn't fit, making your stomach turn. Other times, it hit you like a slap pun very much intended. An entire book would lead you one way, and in the final paragraph, it would twist itself inside out and leave you stunned. Why did that feel so good? Why did we love being tricked? Maybe because childhood doesn't usually come with surprises. Days follow a rhythm. School, dinner, sleep, repeat. But a Goosebumps book could crack that pattern. It made you feel like anything could happen. That even a quiet hallway or a dusty attic might hide something ... more. One of the endings that haunted me the longest came from the girl who cried monster. It followed a girl obsessed with monster stories, always making them up. No one believed her, of course, until she discovers her librarian is a real monster. She tries to expose him, goes through all these intense, scary moments. And then, at the very end, you find out her parents are monsters too, and they eat the librarian to keep their family's secret safe. I think I stopped blinking for a whole minute. Those endings didn't just shock me. They made me think about trust, about how appearances can lie, about the stories people keep, buried under normal smiles. And for a kid who loved imagining the impossible, those endings were pure gold. I kept a little notebook back then, a small one I never showed anyone. I'd write my own endings to the Goosebumps books I read, not because I thought I could do better, but because I wanted to explore what else could have happened. What if Slappy hadn't been defeated? What if the haunted camera actually took someone else's soul? What if the ghost in the attic just wanted a friend? Some nights, I'd reread the twist endings just for that thrill. You know the feeling. That little gasp when it hits you. When you realize the whole book was pulling you toward this moment. It's not the jump scare. It's the reveal. That final puzzle piece falling into place, but it changes the whole picture. I'd lie there afterward, flashlight flickering, heart pounding in a happy kind of fear. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if I could trust what I saw, if my room was really empty, if something was watching from the closet, just waiting until I stopped reading. I'd ask myself, what if the ending hasn't really happened yet? What if the twist is still coming? And sometimes, I wasn't sure. That was the magic, wasn't it? Even now, decades later, I still remember those endings more vividly than most movies or shows I watched. They stay with you, like old friends who scared you for fun, but never truly meant harm. Goosebumps taught us to question what we thought we knew, to expect the unexpected, to enjoy being fooled just for a moment, and to trust that R.L. Stine always had one more trick up his sleeve. By the time I'd finished my third or fourth Goosebumps book, I had convinced myself I'd figured out the formula. I started reading not just for the scares, but to try and outsmart the author. I'd pause at the end of every chapter and whisper to myself, I know what's going to happen next. I really believed I was getting closer, as if I had cracked the code. But of course, I hadn't. Not even once. Did you ever do that? Try to predict the ending before you got there? Did you? Ever feel like you had it all figured out, only for the story to take a sharp left turn and leave you completely baffled? That's what made it so much fun. R.L. Stine didn't just write books. He played with you. Every chapter was a game. And no matter how many times I thought I was finally catching on, he was always 3 steps ahead, smiling from behind the page, letting me believe I was clever, right before pulling the rug out from under me. I'd lie in bed, flashlight in hand, thumb between the pages as I paused to guess. Maybe the new neighbor isn't a vampire after all. Maybe the monster in the basement is just a misunderstood pet. Maybe this whole story is a dream. And then I'd turn the page, heart pounding, only to find out the real twist was so far from what I imagined that I'd have to stop reading just to process it. One night, while reading Say Cheese and Die Again, I was sure I had solved the mystery. I thought, obviously, the cursed camera would break or get lost before it could cause any more harm. Or maybe the photos would turn out to be warnings, and the main character would finally learn to use it for good. But no, the camera didn't. Stop. It got worse. It started messing with time, with identity, and by the end, the damage was permanent. I remember closing the book and just staring at it in disbelief. How did I not see that coming? I asked myself, but the truth is, you weren't supposed to see it coming. That was the point. That was the thrill. You were supposed to follow the clues, build your little theory, and then watch it all fall apart in the best way possible. It was like solving a puzzle where the last piece didn't fit, but somehow made the picture even better. Used to talk about it with friends at school. We'd sit cross-legged on the blacktop at recess, trading paperbacks and wild guesses about what the next plot twist might be. I bet the teacher is the monster, one of us would say. Nah, I think the dog is actually a person under a spell. What if the main character is already dead and doesn't know it? The ideas got more and more ridiculous. But that was the fun. You could say anything and still be wrong. Even the titles tried to fool you. The Ghost Next Door. Sounds simple, right? A haunted house, maybe? Nope. Try Time Loop. Or Monster Paradox. It bent your brain in the best kind of way. And the haunted school? Not just spooky lockers or flickering lights. Think. Another dimension inside a photo lab. Sometimes I'd make mental bets with myself. If I guessed the ending, I'd allow myself an extra cookie after dinner. If I was wrong, I'd have to go to bed 5 minutes early. I lost that bet so many times that I'm surprised I didn't start sleeping at sunset. But deep down, I loved being wrong. Being wrong meant being surprised. And being surprised meant that anything was possible. It gave every story a sense of freedom I didn't realize I craved. In school, everything had rules. Spelling tests had right answers. Math problems had only one solution. But Goosebumps? They cheated those rules. They taught me that creativity didn't have to follow a formula. That sometimes the best stories are the ones you don't see coming. That love for unpredictability crept into other parts of my life. I started noticing more, asking questions, wondering if the quiet kid in the back of the classroom had a secret, imagining what would happen if my reflection ever moved just a second after I did. I'd walk home from school watching shadows, making up stories in my head. What if that old oak tree whispered at night? What if the house at the end of the block wasn't really abandoned? R.L. Stein planted those seeds. He made me question the world in a way that was thrilling, not frightening. He made the ordinary feel almost magical. And every wrong guess I made along the way only added to the wonder. Years later, I'd revisit some of those same books, rereading them as an adult, just to see if I could finally outwit the master. Spoiler alert, I still couldn't, even knowing the twists. I found myself marveling at how carefully he laid the path, leading readers in one direction, while the truth sat quietly, in the shadows, waiting. That's a kind of storytelling that sticks with you. It teaches you humility. It reminds you that cleverness doesn't always win, but curiosity does. And most of all, it keeps your imagination sharp. Like a flashlight under the covers, it cuts through the dark in the most unexpected ways. Looking back, I realize I wasn't just reading books. I was learning to wonder, to ask what if, to see the world as a place full of secrets and surprises, to never settle for the first explanation. So if you ever guessed wrong while reading a Goosebumps book, good. That means it worked, because the moment you think you've figured it all out, that's when the twist begins. I think one of the most beautiful things about growing up in the 90s was how much we shared. Before streaming, before digital downloads, before a world where every piece of entertainment was instantly available, you had to depend on each other. That was especially true with books. And nothing felt more exciting than swapping Goosebumps books with friends at school, one after the other, like little haunted treasures passed in secret. Did you ever trade books during lunch? Slide a dog-eared paperback across the table, fingers sticky with Capri Sun and fruit gushers? Did you whisper, "You're gonna love this one," like you were handing over something forbidden? I remember how serious we were about it. These weren't just books. They were keys. Each one opened a different door in that strange Goosebumps universe. And no one had the whole set, which made the hunt even more thrilling. Some of us had our own personal stash, carefully guarded inside our backpacks, their pages creased from rereads. Others had only one or two, but they were always willing to make a trade. It wasn't about ownership. It was about the journey. I had a friend named Marcus who had the scarecrow walks at midnight. That was the one I wanted so badly. Just the cover alone, those glowing red eyes staring from behind the cornstalks, haunted me in the best possible way. I must have asked him a dozen times to let me borrow it. He'd always say, after I finish it, even though I knew he was reading something else. Finally, one afternoon during recess, he walked up, held it out, and said, "Don't read it alone at night." That was the only warning. That's all he had to say. The moment that book landed in my hands, I felt like I was holding a sacred object. I remember tucking it under my shirt, to keep it safe from the drizzle that started to fall. Running home like I'd just pulled off a heist. That's how it worked. A web of kids trading stories like currency. If someone had Night of the Living Dummy, you'd promise them the Werewolf of Fever Swamp in exchange. We trusted each other. We even had little agreements. No folding the corners. No reading in the tub. Though let's be honest, not everyone followed the rules. And every book brought something new. A new monster, a new setting, a new twist you never saw coming. You didn't need a map, just a cover that popped. And Goosebumps had the best covers. They were loud and bright, but eerie. Always a little wrong in a way that made you stare. Dripping. Fonts, glowing green goo. Spindly hands reaching out of dark places. Each one promised a nightmare you couldn't wait to live out. Sometimes we'd read them together. I remember one rainy afternoon, 4 of us crammed into Sarah's bedroom, taking turns reading aloud from Welcome to Dead House. The room got darker as the storm rolled in. The only light came from her purple lava lamp, slow bubbles stretching like ghosts in the corner. Every now and then, someone would yell boo just to make the others scream and laugh. We weren't just reading. We were building memories without even knowing it. There was this strange sort of pride in knowing how many Goosebumps books you'd read. Kids would brag about it the way others boasted about baseball cards or Beanie Babies. I've read 17, someone would say. Then someone else would raise their hand and go, I'm at 23. It didn't matter if they remembered. Every detail. What mattered was the experience, the thrill, a collection dot, and some of us really did try to collect them all. We kept lists in our notebooks, drew stars next to the ones we finished, circled the ones we still needed. I remember flipping through a Scholastic catalog and seeing the horror at Camp Jalejum listed with a red new sticker beside it. My heart skipped a beat. It felt like a new adventure had just been unlocked, but it wasn't always easy to find the one you wanted. Sometimes the school library didn't have it. Sometimes it was already checked out. That's when your friends became your best chance. And when someone brought one to school that you hadn't read, it was like finding buried treasure. You'd beg, you'd negotiate. I'll let you borrow my Walkman for a day. I'll trade you my Surge soda at lunch. I'll let you copy my math homework. Desperate times called for creative bartering. Looking back now, it was never just about the stories. It was about connection. About those small, quiet moments where you bonded over shared fear and imagination. It was about seeing a friend's face light up when you handed them a night in Terror Tower, telling them, wait till you get to chapter 12. We didn't know we were building a community. We just knew that these stories made us feel something. They made us feel brave, made us laugh nervously at things that weren't real, but somehow felt real. And the best part? We weren't alone in it. I think that's why those memories are so strong, because they were never just mine. They were ours, passed from hand to hand, voice to voice, memory to memory. Every Goosebumps book I read came with a fingerprint. A smudge, a folded page. A memory of a friend who read it before me. And even now, when I walk past a used bookstore and see that shiny green Goosebumps logo peeking from a shelf, I remember what it felt like to chase those stories, to be part of something bigger. 2. Be a kid with a flashlight, a friend, and a book that promised to scare you silly. We didn't need the whole series at once. We built it together. There was something sacred about how we stacked our Goosebumps books, something personal. Each one wasn't just a story we had read, but a little badge of courage, a proof that we had been somewhere strange and survived, so we didn't just toss them into any drawer or backpack when we were done. We displayed them, carefully, lovingly, lined up like tiny trophies on the shelves, in our bedrooms. Did you used to arrange them by color, by title, or maybe by how much each one scared. You? I had this little wooden shelf nailed to the wall just above my bed. It wasn't very big, but it was mine. I remember how much time I spent placing my books there, adjusting them until the spines were perfectly even. All those iconic Goosebumps titles lined up like a spooky rainbow. Say Cheese and Die, The Haunted Mask, The Ghost Next Door, the more. I had, the more it felt like I was building a haunted library of my own. I'd glance at that shelf every night before I fell asleep. Sometimes I'd just stare at the covers, even when I wasn't planning to read. The images were unforgettable. A green hand gripping a doorknob, a ventriloquist dummy's blank, grinning face, a pair of glowing red eyes in the dark. They were so simple, but they had teeth. They bit into your imagination and stayed there. And as the stack grew taller, so did my sense of pride. It wasn't just about owning books. It was about what they meant. Each one represented a memory, a bus ride, a rainy afternoon, a friend's bedroom floor, a flashlight under the sheets, and sometimes a story that had made me so scared I had to stop reading for a while. My little heart thudding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I remember when I finally reached 10. 10 Goosebumps books stacked one on top of the other, their spines slightly worn from my fingers flipping through them again and again. I used to count them over and over, just to feel that tiny swell of joy in my chest. Like I'd accomplished something no one could take away. Some kids had trophies from soccer or baseball. Others had medals from spelling bees. But me? I had Night of the Living Dummy 2 and Monster Blood 3. I had Ghost Beach. Each one like a little haunted gem, polished by time. When friends came over, they'd stand by my shelf and point. "You've got the barking ghost?" They'd ask with wide eyes, like I had just revealed a secret weapon. Sometimes we'd sit cross-legged on the floor and take them down one by one, flipping through pages, trading memories. This one scared me so bad I had to sleep in my mom's room. I read this one 3 times in a row. Don't even mention this one. I couldn't finish it. It's funny how much you could tell about a kid just by looking at their Goosebumps shelf. Some had their books pristine, no creases, like sacred relics. Others were covered in doodles or sticker residue, evidence of how often they were read, touched, and loved. Mine were somewhere in between, worn but cared for, some with soft corners. A few with little folded pages where I'd stopped reading because I'd gotten too nervous to go on. And it wasn't just the books on the shelf. Sometimes I'd decorate the space around them. I remember taping a glow-in-the-dark skeleton above the shelf one Halloween. There was a mini lava lamp nearby, always on, casting soft red light over the spines. I even had a tiny plastic pumpkin I'd gotten from a McDonald's Happy Meal, which I placed next to one day at Horrorland. Like a tiny guardian of my spooky collection. There was a sense of comfort in it, a feeling of home, knowing that those books were there, waiting. I didn't have to read them all the time to feel their presence. They had become part of the room, part of me. And when I added a new one, it was like a little ceremony. I'd clear a space, gently nudge the others over, slide it into place with both hands. Then I'd step back and admire the row, feeling taller somehow, like I had earned something, conquered another fear, expanded my little universe of thrills and chills. Did you ever have a favorite spot to keep your books? A corner that felt safe and special? Even now, when I visit my childhood home, that shelf is still there, faded a bit, the wood slightly warped from time and humidity. But the books? Most of them are still intact. Dusty, sure, and maybe a bit faded around the edges. But when I run my fingers across the covers, it's like shaking hands with an old friend. Those stories were more than just scary tales. They were milestones. markers of growing up, of learning to face fear in a way that was safe and thrilling, all at once. And that shelf, that simple, creaky shelf, held more than just paper and ink. It held my dreams, my nerves, my imagination. That's why we stacked them so carefully. Not because they were just books, but because they were part of our childhood identity. Each volume a chapter in our own story, a reminder of who we were becoming, and the wild, haunted paths that helped us grow. And now, years later, I still smile when I see them lined up, still feel that gentle flutter in my chest, because no matter how old I get, that shelf remains a portal, a trophy case not of victory, but of wonder. There were nights when the scariest thing wasn't even in the book I was reading. It was in the room, in the air, in the hum of quiet things left on just a little too long. Have you ever read a Goosebumps book with the TV on, tuned to no channel? At all? Just that soft gray static hissing like something breathing from the dark? I used to do it on purpose, Doc, not because I needed the light or the sound, but because the static made everything feel more alive, more haunted. I don't think I even realized it at the time. I just knew that when the volume was turned down low and that snowy screen flickered in the background, the stories felt closer. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch just a little further. The creaks in the house grew louder, and every now and then the static would stutter, just enough to make me look over my shoulder. Was it a trick of the light? A loose wire? Or something else? I never questioned it too deeply. That was part of the fun. Goosebumps were meant to be read in settings that made you question every sound. And in my room, with the curtains drawn, the TV buzzing behind me like it had something to say, my flashlight casting long shapes across my bedsheets, the story in my hands became more than fiction. It was something I felt, not the glow of that static. Screen filled the room with a dull light, just enough to see by if the flashlight batteries were starting to die. I'd sit there, my blanket pulled around my shoulders like armor, the pages rustling in my hands. Sometimes I'd look up, just to be sure nothing had moved in the room. I mean, what if Slappy had crawled out of the book? What if that quiet thud was really the mask from the haunted mask rolling off the dresser? Of course, nothing ever happened. But still, I'd keep reading. The strange thing was, the static almost helped me concentrate. It was white noise, but also white dread, like background music in a horror movie. It set the tone, and I think deep down I knew that, even as a kid. I was building an atmosphere, curating my own private scary movie scene. Except I was the audience and the director, and the book was the script. There were some nights when I'd read with the TV on Channel 3, just to get that soft ghost of a signal. That was the channel we used for the VCR. So if nothing was playing, it was just this endless ripple of black and white snow. No voices, no images, just possibility. Just the sound of nothing, and maybe something. I remember once reading the cuckoo clock of doom and swearing I heard the static whisper my name. Probably my imagination. But back then, didn't everything feel almost real? Sometimes I'd angle the TV so it reflected the room behind me. You ever do that? So you could see the hallway or the window without turning around. It was a kid's version of a security camera. I told myself I just wanted to be safe, but really, I think I liked the thrill of it. Reading scary stories with your back to an open doorway was its own kind of brave. The book would grip me, of course. It always did. I'd be halfway through a chapter and suddenly hear the static change, or the house would settle, or the neighbors. Dog would bark, and my heart would leap into my throat. Then I'd laugh to myself, or maybe whisper, "Nice one, R.L. Stein," as if he'd orchestrated the whole setting, right down to the snowy screen on my TV dot, and on the rare nights when the static would flicker just for a second my imagination, would go wild. I'd picture some character reaching out from the screen, or a creepy message hidden in the noise. Once, I even paused while reading Welcome to Dead House, stared at the static, and said out loud, "If you're there, blink once." I waited. Of course, nothing happened. But my pulse didn't slow down for at least 5 minutes. That's how deep those stories got into us, Dot. It wasn't just reading. It was immersing. It was building a cocoon of tension and letting the book push us deeper. The static, the dim lamp, the cold spot near the window, the way the fan would suddenly creak, even though no one had touched it, all of it fed into the story, fed into the fear. And yet, I loved it. I wanted the chills. I wanted the tension. Even if I ended up sleeping with the light on, or tiptoeing to the bathroom, because I was convinced something was hiding behind the shower curtain, it was worth it. Every scare was a thrill. Every moment I jumped was proof that I was alive, that I could feel something strong and vivid and unforgettable. Dot, do you remember a night like that? One where the book, the room, the noise, all of it came together in just the right way. I'd close the book eventually. Usually not because I wanted to stop reading, but because my eyes were heavy and the static had lulled me into a sleepy trance. I'd reach for the remote, turn the TV off, and the silence that followed was deafening. It made the room feel heavier somehow, like the world had been holding its breath. Then I'd slide the book under my pillow, like a secret, pull the covers up and stare into the dark, waiting for my heart to stop racing. Even now, I sometimes wish I could recreate that. Sit in that room again, static on, book in hand, fear on the edge of delight. Because in those quiet, flickering moments, I wasn't just reading a Goosebumps story. I was living one. The strange thing is, I always felt the bravest while I was reading. Even when the Goosebumps story got tense, even when monsters crept through the pages or masks fused to faces or kids vanished into the woods, I never really felt afraid. Not while the words were flowing, not while the flashlight was on, and the blankets were tucked safely around my body like a shield. Reading gave me control. I could stop when I wanted. I could laugh at the scary parts. I could imagine myself surviving whatever twisted plot R.L. Stine had dreamed up. And somehow, that made me feel strong. But something always changed the moment I turned off the lights. Have you ever felt that shift? That instant flip from calm to alert? From safe to unsure? As if the darkness had been waiting. Waiting just for you, Dot. It always started the same way. I'd finish my chapter, maybe stretch a little, tuck the book under my pillow like a hidden treasure. I'd click off the flashlight, then reach for the lamp by my bed, hesitating just for a moment. My fingers would rest on the switch, and I'd tell myself I was too old to be scared, that it was just a story, that monsters weren't real, and closets didn't creak unless they were old, and nothing actually lived under beds. Then, with a deep breath, I'd flip the switch, and everything changed. The room, moments before cozy and quiet, suddenly stretched out in all directions. The ceiling seemed higher. The shadows on the walls deepened. No longer soft corners of furniture, but outlines of something else, something watching. The silence became heavy. My ears strained to hear things I didn't want to hear. Was that a footstep in the hallway? A whisper from the closet? A rustle under the bed? Was something moving? I would pull the covers up to my chin, like that thin layer of cotton could protect me from anything crawling, slithering, or reaching toward me in the dark. My heart would thump a little faster, and I'd freeze, just listening. Did I really hear something just now? Or was it my imagination again? The way it always got too wild after one too many chapters? But isn't that what those books were designed to do? To let your imagination run free, and sometimes run too far? I used to lie there, eyes wide open, staring at the dark space between the end of my bed and the floor. I knew what I'd read, knew the creatures were fictional, but I also remembered the illustrations, the eyes, the claws, the impossible grins. And for some reason, my bed always felt more vulnerable when the lights went out. Like maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the night something decided to reach up Dot. Did you ever dangle your foot over the side of the bed, then pull it back quickly, just in case? I did, almost every night, just a little test, to prove to myself there was nothing there. And I failed that test every time. The worst was when I had to go to the bathroom. That meant stepping onto the floor, walking past the open closet, rushing, too close to the mirror. In the daytime, none of it mattered. But at night, after a Goosebumps book, the hallway became a tunnel of dread, and the bathroom light switch felt a mile away. Still, I made myself do it. That was part of the ritual, part of the bravery, the kind of courage only a kid can feel, fueled by equal parts fear and pride. I'd tell myself, if I can walk through this hallway alone, I can handle anything. And somehow I believed it. Sometimes I'd whisper the title of the book to myself, like a spell. Night of the Living Dummy. The ghost next door. The girl who cried monster. As if naming the story would keep it locked inside the pages. Like if I acknowledged it, it couldn't hurt me. Funny how logic worked when you were 9. When I finally made it back to bed and pulled the covers up tight, I'd shut my eyes and force myself to sleep. Even then, I could still see scenes from the story playing behind my eyelids. I'd replay the twist ending, wonder if I'd seen it coming, try to remember if there had been clues I missed. I always wanted to outsmart the book, guess the twist before it arrived, but I never did. That was part of the magic. And in the dark, alone with my thoughts and the echoes of the story still whispering in my brain, I'd smile. Because no matter how scared I got, no matter how long it took for me to finally drift off, I knew I'd do it all again the next night. Fear, in those days, wasn't something I avoided. It was something I chased, something I invited into my room, wrapped in glossy covers and creepy fonts, and the promise of a surprise on the very last page. The kind of fear that made you turn off the lights and instantly wish you hadn't. I think about that now, about how different fear is when you're older. It's heavier, less playful. But back then, it was almost a game, a delicious shiver, a thrill that made your world feel just a little more alive. So, if you've ever sat in bed with your heart racing, staring into the dark after a Goosebumps story, wondering if that soft rustle meant something else was awake with you, know this ... you weren't alone. I was there too, in my own room, with my own fears, my own flashlight, and the same question in my mind. Did something just move under the bed? Some nights, even after the book was closed, after the flashlight was turned off, and the room had sunk back into silence, my mind wouldn't let go. The shadows were too deep, the story too vivid, the images still flickering behind my eyes like the afterglow of a TV left on too long. And on those nights, there was always one name that lingered in my thoughts longer than the rest. SLAPPY. That name still does something to me. Does it to you too? That mischievous little grin, the black bow tie, the slicked back hair, and those awful wooden eyes that somehow looked like they could blink when you weren't looking. He was just a character, a ventriloquist dummy from the Goosebumps series, a silly doll with a creepy face. But to me, and probably to every other kid who ever read Night of the Living Dummy, he was the one that stayed, the one who didn't go. Away when you shut the book. Do you remember lying in bed after reading about him, staring at your closet door, wondering ... What if? What if Slappy was in there? What if he had somehow slipped out of the book and crept into your room while you weren't looking? What if he was sitting on the top shelf, waiting, just out of sight? What if you opened the closet and he wasn't there? But then, when you turned your back, you heard that tiny telltale thud, ... The sound of little wooden shoes tapping against the floor? I used to pull the covers up just under my nose, watching the closet like it might move. It was always closed, but not latched. Just a hairline crack between the door and the frame, enough to let my imagination push through. I would lie there, motionless, trying to hear if anything stirred inside. Every creak of the house, every pop of the floorboards made me think, he's coming out ... It was terrifying, but in that special, deliciously weird way only 90s fear could be. We weren't scared like adults are scared. We didn't have bills, or jobs, or the weight of the world. We had Slappy. We had haunted masks and ghostly neighbors and evil cameras. And somehow, that made our little beds feel like islands of safety, surrounded by oceans of thrilling dread. We'd scare ourselves for the fun of it. For the adventure. Was it really fun to believe that a dummy might come to life in your room? Oddly ... yes. That was part of the magic. There was one night I remember more vividly than others. I had just finished Night of the Living Dummy 2, and the story had really gotten to me. I mean, Slappy had bitten someone in that one. Bitten. The idea of a doll with sharp little teeth sneaking up on someone while they slept ... I couldn't shake it. I turned off the flashlight, rolled over, and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Stopped glancing back at the closet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there with his painted-on smirk, his head tilted just slightly to the side, like he was listening ... And then the worst thing happened. The closet door creaked open. Just an inch, maybe two. Enough to make my breath freeze in my chest. I stayed perfectly still. My mind raced. Had it been open the whole time? Had the air vent pushed it? Or had ... had he opened it? I didn't call for my parents. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just reached out slowly, grabbed my pillow, hugged it tight, and whispered something like, "I know you're not real." It didn't help, but it felt like something I needed to say, something to remind myself that I was in control, that this was my room, my story, and Slappy wasn't going to win. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, the closet door was still cracked open, but there was no Slappy. No wooden footprints, no chaos, just clothes in boxes and the comforting truth that fiction was just fiction. Or was it? That's the question I think we all secretly loved asking ourselves. What if it wasn't just fiction? What if those stories were more than just printed words? What if believing made them just a little bit more real? That's why we kept reading. Why we couldn't stop. Why even now, decades later, the memory of reading Goosebumps before bed still stirs something inside us. It wasn't just about the scare. It was about the mix, that perfect blend of fear and fun, of curiosity and caution, of being terrified and thrilled at the same time. We weren't just reading books. We were stepping into secret worlds. Worlds where anything could happen, where monsters lurked behind masks, and basements held hidden doors, and dummies came to life. And when it was all over, we didn't close the book and forget. We turned off the light and kept wondering. That's what the 90s gave us. That incredible ability to believe just enough to be scared, but not too much to stop. The years when your imagination could fill every shadow with possibility, and every creaky closet held a chance for adventure. Even now, as adults, sometimes I wonder what we'd see if we opened those closets again. Not just the physical ones, but the ones in our memories. Would Slappy be waiting there with his mischievous grin? Would our childhood fears come tumbling out like old toys left in the attic? Or would we smile and remember that once upon a time, we chose to be scared, and we loved every second of it, Dot. So if you ever find yourself lying in bed, hearing a strange noise, and your thoughts drift back to a certain dummy in a little black tuxedo, ... Just remember, Dot, it's okay to check the closet, Dot, just in case.